Well, Richard, did you have a good morning?
We did.
So what did you discuss this morning?
We took the idea of Jesus being identifier and focused really on the story of the baptism and the temptation, because the thing I like about Mark's account is, certainly with the temptation, it's so minimalist. And it simply says he was taken and he was tempted. And I think we can relate to that in some ways easier than the picture we get in Matthew and Luke with the elaboration of the three specific things. Just saying he was tempted makes him seem far more human, because temptation comes every day in the big things that we are tempted by, but equally by the little things, that extra piece of chocolate or that extra slice of cake or whatever it is. Temptation is almost endemic. And so we were talking about the way in which there's great importance in seeing the fact that Jesus comes and was tempted as a sign of that he is one of us, which is why I think he was baptized, to show that he was one of us. He's one of us, and therefore he offers us that opportunity to move beyond that. Because we tied the Mark passage with a little bit from 2 Corinthians, which, depending on the translation, talks about as being a fragrance, an aroma of the knowledge of Jesus, which is a great phrase.
Wow.
That Paul uses to sort of give that impression that when we inhabit this world where we are striving to be a Christian, we're striving to overcome temptation, we're striving to live the life of the forgiven even, get my English right, it leaves something behind. And it's that aroma that for some will captivate and for some it will put them off. But it's that again, Paul's showing in the sense that this is all about humanity and the fact that we can't predict how people are going to respond, but we need to go out there and give them the chance to see that Jesus offers this flavour to life, and that's that flavour of it being real, that Jesus knows what we are going through. He identifies with us, that he stands alongside us, which is there from the point when he is baptised right through to the crucifixion, the resurrection. And it's all Jesus saying, I know how tough it is being human. Here is your way out. It's almost like the message that captivated the slaves in America. Life was unbelievably harsh and grim, and they discovered Jesus. And if you listen to the soulful music of the Negro spirituals, they're really all about this, the Jesus who knows what it's like to be in the grimness and misery and muck of life, and the Jesus who offers us this better life.
Wow. Here
on earth, and then the potential of this even better life beyond death, when the dead will rise. And there, in a sense, is the picture of Jesus saying, come on, get through this horrible stage, and what will follow will be better.
That's brilliant.
Well, we try.
Wow. Well, we really focus more on the friend side of things, being a friend of God, which years ago when I heard that there was a song that was bounded around at the time in charismatic circles, I am a friend of God, he calls me friend, and I was like, how on earth could anybody actually think that God would want to be friends with me?
Yeah.
I really found it quite offensive at the time, singing that. Is this sound doctrine, being a friend of God?
But what a friend we have in Jesus.
Very true.
That, are you?
Very true. Yes, it's not a new idea,
no,
really.
Yeah.
When you look at the scriptures, actually, that's what Jesus wants. So we looked at Zacchaeus and how that Jesus, despite Zacchaeus being really despised, he was working with the occupying Roman forces. He was extorting money out of poor, vulnerable people. People were being taxed like 30 or 40% their annual income. Tax officials would go up to people just walking down the street and say, "Oh, you, I'm having some money off you," and you couldn't say anything against them because they were backed by the Roman occupiers. So, I looked at Zacchaeus, that Jesus wanted to spend time with him. Jesus wanted to be Zacchaeus' friend, even though everybody around would have really sneered and been upset about it.
I've always wondered what it must have been like up that tree, because it says he's short, so he's obviously clambered up there. I don't know how high the tree was, to sort of, there's that element of what intrigued me about Jesus, that he was there to listen and to observe, really, I suppose. He wanted to see what all the fuss was about. And what it must have been like when Jesus turns to him and says, "Here, mate, come down here, I'm coming to your house." And what must have been going through his head? Because we've no idea what Jesus said, no idea what the preface to all this, how much Jesus had taught. Just that, Zacchaeus, come down from your tree, I'm coming to your house. And it must, you just can't begin to imagine what it must have been going through his head.
He knew his name. He knew his name.
Yeah.
Zacchaeus.
Yeah. But I suspect tax collectors were known.
Well, yeah,
so
definitely.
It's not too surprising.
They was hated more than anybody.
But even so, the fact that Jesus calls him by name, when lots of his fellow Jews would have just shunned him, ignored him because he was unclean, because he was contaminated by working with the exploiters, not being properly Jewish, and all these sorts of things, because he was with them rather than with us. And suddenly Jesus gives him this new identity and says, "Come on, mate." You wonder what went through his mind as he came down the tree, as he walked home, as he ordered his servants back, as he got whatever it was ready, wondering what was going to happen next when this guy was going to sit next to him, and the pictures of all his chums there as well. What he thought must have been about to happen.
It was revolutionary. Tax collectors wasn't allowed to even give an account in a court of law. There were so many things that they wasn't allowed to do because they was ostracized from society.
It's difficult to find a modern parallel for how people would have treated Zacchaeus.
Very true.
Because he would have been the scum of the earth in the eyes of the Jews. And then you wonder what this community, observing this, and Jesus saying, "Come down," must have thought. Because there's lots of places where the Pharisees get on their high horses and look down their noses at Jesus. And this must have been one of those moments, because Zacchaeus was just beyond the pale.
Definitely.
But you wonder what the ordinary people who were there, who weren't part of the religious elite, who weren't part of the religious police force, almost sort of type things, and seeing Jesus reaching out to this guy who he shouldn't have done, in the same way the story's been there about Jesus reaching out to lepers and people who were ill, the blind and things, people who in Jewish eyes were ritually unclean and therefore shouldn't be dealt with. And suddenly this travelling preacher, this man about who all this news is going on, suddenly says, "Come on, come in." Yeah. And it must have been staggering, and in a way it must have been liberating. Because suddenly it's not about odious holiness anymore. Suddenly it's about giving people value, bringing them in and saying to them, "You matter and you are important to God." Forget this lot who say God's not interested in you. It's really revolutionary. It's really exciting.
It's revolutionary in our lives when we think to ourselves, "Oh, God doesn't want fellowship with me, doesn't want relationship, doesn't want friendship with me." We put so many barriers between us and God, thinking, things that I've done in my past, maybe things that we're even involved in now, would stop our friendship with God. But this shows us that actually Jesus wants friendship now.
So in a way, this particular week in this 10-week cycle, I think is probably in some ways it's one of the most important statements we can make.
Yeah.
That Jesus identifies with us, that Jesus is our friend.
Yes.
And if we can understand that and sense that and see that, that perhaps allows for a different relationship than if we simply think of Jesus as Lord, Redeemer, Saviour, all those important things. But actually, if you combine that with the intimacy of friendship and the solidarity of identifying, you create a picture of the one who is God, but who is also human, but the one who is alongside solidarity, whatever you want to call it, which is really quite exciting because it's in the here and now. It's not just in terms of eternal possibilities. It's the fact that Jesus knows what it's like to be tempted, what it's like to be an outsider, what it's like to be under attack, all those things that we have experienced in some way in our lives. Jesus has been there, and the fact he's walked the path before us is what makes it so exciting, I think.
Definitely. And there's also the fact that so often we think that we've got to become perfect before we can become acceptable to Jesus. But Jesus demonstrates actually in our brokenness, when we're not perfect, Jesus wants to be friends with us. And through the process of that friendship, maybe we might just change in the process, just like Zacchaeus did.
So being a Christian, in a sense, is about being intentional, aspirational. It's about believing that the Jesus who walks alongside us can transform us.
Yeah.
And that those things with which we struggle can be overcome. And that requires effort on our behalf. It demands that we put something into it to seek to overcome. But it says that Jesus knows that, and he's with us, and he's alongside us, and he's prepared to help us if we're prepared to trust in him.
Yes, exactly.
So, great theme this week.
Really enjoyed it.
And the excitement of is it Revolution next week? Revolution in a fortnight. It's something else next week. But it's this exciting conversations about these things that we in a sense know, but we need to bring more into our minds to remind us of just how phenomenal Jesus is.
Indeed.